They hid my grandmother's will so they could take everything for themselves, but I found her last letter, in which she warned me about the betrayal of my own family. Stay with us until the very end to find out how the story ends. We look forward to your comments and thoughts on the story. I arrived at her house for the first time since the funeral. The key she had once given me personally had long since become a relic, heavy, cold, engraved with the letter M. Mary, my grandmother. She called me her little Lizzie, even though I had long since ceased to be a child. And yet, when I was with her, I always felt small. The house stood empty, as if it were holding its breath. I hesitated for a long time before crossing the threshold. No one was inside. There was no smell of her vanilla cookies, no sound of the radio on a quiet station. Only dusty silence and slightly creaking floorboards, as if they remembered who had walked on them. I wasn't at the funeral. I wasn't invited. I found out about her death from a neighbor, Mrs. Donovan, who still wrote postcards. She called me and asked why I hadn't come to say goodbye. I almost dropped the phone. What do you mean she died? I couldn't even ask any other questions at that moment. Later, when I called my cousin Rachel, she replied curtly, "We thought you were too busy." Too busy to say goodbye to the woman who raised me? They had arranged everything without me. They sold some of her jewelry and divided her furniture and photographs among themselves. They said there was no will, but for some reason, I didn't believe them. My grandmother was a very organized person. She never did anything spontaneously, especially when it came to the house she had built her entire life. I climbed the creaky stairs to the second floor, her bedroom. It still retained my grandmother's strictness and coziness. On the dresser was a frame with a picture of us. I was 9, wearing a frilly dress, and she was wearing her favorite hat. I didn't know why I had come. Probably to say goodbye in my own way, or to find something that would tell me, no, she couldn't have left without leaving me a word. Not a thought, not a will. And then I saw her old box, wooden with traces of age, carved with a maple leaf pattern. It had always stood on her dressing table, but it was locked. Now it was open, as if it had been waiting. Inside was a letter, folded in half, with my name written in a hand I would have recognized even through my tears. Lizzie. I unfolded it slowly, as if afraid to touch her last words. My darling girl, if you are reading this letter, then everything has happened as I feared. I knew they would try to hide what I wrote from you, but I believe you will find it, because you are not like them. I have written my will, and you are in it. They can say whatever they want, but the truth is in my letter and in my papers. I have left everything that matters to you, because you are my family, my real family. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the letter in my trembling fingers, and I felt something rising inside me, not anger, no. Something stronger. A quiet determination. My late grandmother had left me more than just words. She had left me the right to restore justice. I returned home late that evening. I still had the box in my hand and the letter in my bag. The letter that changed everything. I read it over and over again on the bus, oblivious to the scenery outside the window, the passers-by, or my own thoughts. They had lied. Every single one of them. My sister Rachel, my cousin Jason, even my Aunt Evelyn, who always seemed to me the most sensible of all my relatives, they all assured me that my grandmother had not left a will. They spoke calmly, confidently, with expressions on their faces as if nothing could have happened. She just didn't have time, Rachel said, rolling her eyes. You know she had memory problems. Memory problems? My grandmother wrote to-do lists and reread her favorite novels until the last days of her life, never forgetting a single line. She would never have allowed herself to leave without putting her affairs in order. And she certainly wouldn't have left everything to these people who, during her lifetime, had seen her only as a source of worry and property. I took the box of her papers out of the closet that I had brought with me from home. Receipts, old letters, recipes, knitting patterns, even her diary from last year. But there was no will among them, so it really could have been hidden or destroyed. I remembered what Rachel had said to me on the phone. There was nothing, Liz. We checked everything. If there was a will, we would have found it. We. Who is we? They acted so confidently, as if they had something to hide. And Grandma, she knew. She had a premonition. and she left me a letter. The next morning, I went to the law office where, as far as I remembered, my grandmother had drawn up the deed to the house 10 years ago. It was a small office on the corner of Maple Street with a wooden sign that read Grayson and Partners. The secretary was polite and quiet. I explained who I was and asked her to check if Mary Hart, my grandmother, had made a will. She checked the computer and asked me to wait. "One moment, please. I'll get a lawyer." And at that very moment, my heart started racing. You know that feeling when you're almost certain that everything is about to change, one way or the other. A man in his 50s came out with a warm smile and a touch of gray at his temples. "Lisbeth," he asked. I nodded. "My name is Peter Grayson. I worked with your grandmother several times." "Yes, we do have a will registered from Mary Hart. The latest version is dated 2 years ago. But," he paused for a moment, "it has been revoked." "Revoked?" My voice trembled. "Yes, at the request of her relatives. A month after her death, we received a notice from Rachel Hart, supported by several family members, stating that the will was invalid. They provided proof of incapacity at the time of signing." My breath caught in my throat. A certificate of incapacity, signed retroactively. They destroyed her will. They destroyed her last words. And they did it with the expectation that I would never find out. But I did. And now this is just the beginning. I walked down the street in a trembling state of tension, clutching the folder with a copy of the revoked will. It wasn't just a document. It was a crude, cold-blooded attempt to erase the will of a person who had lived an honest and dignified life. And worst of all, it was done by those who called themselves family. I didn't cry. Not this time. I was angry. Not in a stormy, hysterical way that makes you want to break things. No, it was a quiet, dense anger, like concrete frozen inside me. A clear understanding. They decided that I wouldn't find out, that I would keep quiet, that I would swallow it. But they forgot who I was. I was Mary Hart's granddaughter, the woman who raised me alone when my mother disappeared from my life and my father became a stranger. The woman who got up at 5 every morning to bake fresh bread and stroked my hair every night until I fell asleep. She deserved to be heard, even after her death. I knew where to start, with those who knew her better than all my relatives put together. The neighbors. The first person I called was Mrs. Donovan. She was the neighbor who told me about my grandmother's death. She lived across the street in a small purple house with curtains that were always swaying. "Lizzie? Of course, come over, dear, I'll tell you everything," she said right away, without even waiting for me to finish my request. I arrived at her house that same evening. She was already waiting with 2 cups of tea and cookies, as if she knew the conversation would be long. Mary was of sound mind until she became very weak. She began, squinting. But that was at the end. And the will? Oh yes, she told me about that. I tensed up. When? A year ago. She told me she had drawn up a document so that everything would be done the way I want, not the way they want, she said. I asked her who she was leaving everything to. She smiled and said, "To those who really love me." "Lizzie." I felt my fingers tighten around the mug. "Can you confirm that?" "All I can do is sign it. 100 times. Mary wasn't crazy, Lizzie. She just didn't trust anyone but you. Because everyone else just came to take. You gave." The next day, I went to see Mr. Fisher, the pharmacist where my grandmother used to buy her medicine. He took her card out of the archives. All the entries were clear, consistent, with no hint of confusion. Then I went to the library. In the lending register, there were her signatures almost every day until the last month of her life. There were even notes in the margins of one book that had been returned with her hand in it. Excellent novel, but the ending is weak. And the date. In a week, I collected 6 signatures, 2 written statements, and a list of 3 people willing to confirm that my grandmother was completely sane and capable. And the more I collected, the stronger I felt inside. This was no longer just about protecting an inheritance. This was about protecting her memory, her truth, her voice. I didn't call. I just showed up. I stood at her door with a stiff folder in my hands and my heart pounding like a drum. Inside the folder were copies of the testimony, the library receipt, Mrs. Donovan's statement, and my grandmother's letter. Each page was like a blow to the wall of their lies. Rachel opened the door almost immediately. She was wearing a white shirt and sweatpants, a slight annoyance on her face. She probably thought it was the mailman or a neighbor with another complaint about her constantly barking spaniel. "Oh, Lizzie," she said with a forced smile. "What a surprise." "Come in, I won't be long," I said, not crossing the threshold. "We need to talk." She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "About what exactly?" "About Grandma's will. And about the lie you've all been so carefully constructing." The smile slipped from her face like a raindrop on a window. "Are you really involved in this?" "I'm already involved. And deeper than you think." I opened the folder and slowly took out the letter. Her face paled. "She wrote to me. She left a letter. Right in that box you didn't notice. Or decided to leave because it looked empty." "That doesn't mean anything," Rachel replied, almost whispering. "But it means the opinion of the neighbors, the pharmacist, and the librarian, and her personal doctor, whom she saw almost until she died. They all have the same version. She was of sound mind. And that means the certificate you used to invalidate her will is a forgery. Or, at best, fiction." Rachel looked away nervously. She faltered. "We were afraid she would leave everything to you. We're family too." "Family?" I took a step forward. "You didn't even call me when she died. You didn't even let me say goodbye. You arranged everything quietly because you knew there was a will. And you knew who she left everything to. And now you want to sweep it all under the rug." She lowered her eyes. She was silent. I shoved the list of signatures into her hands. "This is just the beginning. I'm not out for revenge. But I'm going to restore justice. For her. And for myself." She was silent. For the first time in all this time, she didn't make excuses. She just stared at the papers as if she could see her own reflection in them. "You have time to think about it," I said quietly. "But the sooner you tell the truth, the fewer the consequences will be." And I left. It was already getting dark outside. Passers-by were carrying their shopping, children were playing in the yard, and I walked with my head held high. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt that I was doing the right thing. When I entered the lawyer's office, it felt like the entire weight of my grandmother's house was behind me. Not metaphorically, I was actually holding a folder with evidence, letters, scans, even a printout of the will that I had managed to get from Peter Grayson. He, by the way, had no right to give it to me, but if the truth suffers because of formalities, it's not justice, it's bureaucracy, he said and signed a copy. Mrs. Donovan recommended the lawyer to me, Martin Cross, a man in his 60s, wearing a plaid jacket, with eyes that showed not a hint of surprise. He didn't make any sounds or ask unnecessary questions. He just listened. "There was a will," I began. "It was revoked on the basis of questionable medical reports. And I, as the legal heir, was not only not notified, but was not given any opportunity to participate in the proceedings." I laid the papers out in front of him. "Here's a letter from my grandmother. Here are copies of statements from neighbors, the pharmacist, the librarian. Here's an excerpt from her medical records. And this is a list of people who are willing to confirm that she was of sound mind." He slowly leafed through each page, occasionally jotting something down in his notebook. Then, looking up, he said, "You're not just right. You're well informed. And if everything is really as you say, we can restore the will. Or, at the very least, prove that its annulment was illegal." I felt a twinge of relief and anxiety. "What do we need to do?" "Start with an official request to the court. We'll file a petition to restore your inheritance rights, stating that you weren't notified. We'll also request an independent review of the incapacity certificate. If it's found to be questionable, the case is ours." I nodded. "And the family?" He smiled slightly. "Usually in cases like this, they get angry at first, then they threaten, and then they come to an agreement. But with your materials, I'm afraid they won't have much room to maneuver." "I don't want conflict," I said quietly. "I want justice. That's the strongest thing you can want in a case like this, Miss Hart." He stood up and held out his hand. "Shall we get started?" I nodded. At that moment, I felt for the first time that I wasn't just a granddaughter. I wasn't just a girl with a letter. I was someone who could restore the truth. It was only 3 days after I filed the lawsuit that the calls started. First from Aunt Evelyn, who had kept her distance for years and said she didn't meddle in other people's business. "Lizzie, dear, I just wanted to make sure you've thought this through. Family is no place for scandals." Family. I listened to her until she finished, then replied calmly. "The scandal didn't start with me, Aunt Evelyn. It started the moment you all decided I wasn't worthy of being part of the decision. Grandma left everything to me, and you knew it. You just didn't want me to find out." She coughed awkwardly, muttered something like, "If that's how you feel," and hung up. A few hours later, Jason called. He was less gentle this time. "Listen, Lizzie, we were all in shock after her death. Maybe we didn't handle it the best way, but taking it to court? That's going too far. What do you want?" He said it almost irritably, as if I were a burden spoiling the perfect picture of their world. "I want what is rightfully mine, and I want my grandmother's wishes to be carried out. She was already, strange, you know," he began. "She mixed things up, forgot dates. I have evidence," I interrupted. "Doctors, neighbors, the library, letters. Don't try to intimidate me anymore. It's useless." He hung up. That evening, I received a message from Rachel. "I didn't know she wrote to you. I thought you were distant. I'm sorry if it was too much. Can we talk before the trial?" Interesting. Now that the case was officially open and I had a lawyer, she wanted to talk. But there was no time for sentimentality. The next day, Martin Cross informed me that the court had accepted the preliminary motion and scheduled a hearing for the end of the month. My first victory. Small, but real. And then something unexpected happened. A courier arrived at my house. "For Elizabeth Hart," he said, handing me a small box. There was no sender's name on it, only the initials MH. I opened it immediately. Inside was my grandmother's old brooch, the one with the green stone that she wore on special occasions. Underneath was an envelope with no date, written in her handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means they did what I feared. I left the truth in the letter. And this brooch is for you, because you are always more than just my granddaughter. You are my pride and joy. Don't be afraid to fight for justice. Believe in yourself, just like I believed in you." I sat there with the letter in my hands and felt a new strength rising inside me. Not anger or resentment, but determination. Grandma had thought of everything, even the possibility that I would give up. But I won't give up. The courthouse looked cold, as if it had been built specifically to test a person's strength. High ceilings, light-colored walls, dim lighting, and the smell of paper. I sat on a bench outside courtroom number 3, clutching a folder that I knew by heart, down to every paper clip. Martin Cross stood nearby, calm and collected. His confidence rubbed off on me a little, as if someone nearby knew for sure that the truth was on my side. When they announced that the hearing was beginning, I noticed them entering the courtroom. Rachel was wearing a black jacket, tense and nervous. Jason walked in with a show of confidence. Evelyn's face was cold, as if she had come to a boring dinner party rather than a courtroom. They sat down on opposite sides of the room. I felt their eyes on me, but I didn't turn around. The judge, a woman in a strict robe with silver hair, nodded and opened the case. Martin stood up first. "Your Honor, we are petitioning to have the certificate of incompetence of the late Mary Hart, on which the will was revoked, declared invalid. We have documents and evidence proving that she was of sound mind at the time it was drawn up." He handed the judge a folder. I noticed Rachel flinch. Jason stared ahead, as if listening only to the formalities. "Do you have any witnesses?" asked the judge. "Yes. Written testimony and willingness to appear in court. In addition, there is evidence of an attempt to conceal the deceased's wishes." The judge leaned over the folder. She silently leafed through the pages for several minutes. Then she looked up and asked, defense, "Do you acknowledge receipt of the will?" "It wasn't valid," Evelyn stammered. Mary had memory problems. She could have forgotten that she had already written the document. The judge raised her eyebrows. "Do you have a medical report?" "Yes." Jason stood up and handed over his report. Dr. Simmons, her attending physician, signed it. The judge nodded and began to study the report. A minute later, she frowned. Why was the report based on a single appointment that lasted less than 10 minutes? Why is there no medical history, observations, or notes? The courtroom fell silent. The doctor had known Mary for a long time, Rachel said uncertainly. The judge put the document aside. I want a confrontation with the doctor, as well as the plaintiff's witnesses. At this point, there are insufficient grounds to consider the will invalid. She tapped her gavel. The next hearing will be in 2 weeks. Until then, both sides must provide additional evidence. When we left the courtroom, no one said a word. Only Rachel walked past me and whispered, "You don't know the whole truth." I turned around. Maybe I don't, but I know enough to understand that Grandma deserved to have her wishes carried out. After the trial, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The scene in the courtroom kept replaying in my head, their expressions, the judge's voice, Rachel's words, "You don't know the whole truth." But what truth could there be other than what they were hiding? I didn't know what to do with these thoughts, so I just got up, made some tea, and took an old box of my grandmother's things from the shelf. It was an unofficial archive, postcards, napkins, an embroidered handkerchief, old glasses, and a photo album. Leafing through the pages, I came across one of us. I was about 10. I was sitting on the porch of her house, eating ice cream, and my grandmother was telling me something, raising her index finger. I remember that day. We were talking about people. "Lizzie," she said, "sometimes the people closest to you can be the most distant. Not because they're mean. It's because they forget. They forget that you're a person, not a function. You won't forget me, will you?" I asked. "Never," she replied. "You're my family, even if everyone else turns their back on you." I felt my throat tighten again. It was a simple phrase, without any pathos. But it contained everything I didn't get from others. Not Rachel, not Jason, none of them looked at me with the warmth she did. With her, I could be myself, not a good granddaughter, not a graduate, not successful, not obligatory. Just Lizzie. And that was enough. I remember once we were baking cookies, and everything was falling out of my hands. I got upset and started crying. And my grandmother said, "You have the right to make mistakes. The main thing is not to forget who you are. Don't let others label you like an old suitcase. You are a whole story, and you are writing it yourself." Now I felt that this was exactly what I was doing. Writing my own story. Yes, with a struggle. Yes, with resistance. But honestly, and with memories that warm me more than a sun. I put the photo in a frame, for the first time in many years, and I put it on the table. Now it will be with me, always. The trial resumed on Wednesday. It was a cloudy day, and the coolness in the courtroom seemed particularly piercing. I arrived early with Martin. Today, our first witness was supposed to testify, Mr. Hendricks, the pharmacist who had been dispensing my grandmother's medication for almost 20 years. He arrived on time. He was a short, thin man in his 70s, with slightly trembling hands and a calm voice. He didn't wear glasses, but he squinted all the time, out of habit or nervousness, I didn't know. The judge nodded to him. "Please tell us what you know." He cleared his throat, looked at me, and began. "Mary Hart was a regular customer of mine. We knew each other for many years. Until the very end, she did everything herself, ordered her medications, checked her prescriptions, kept her records. She even argued with me about dosages if she thought the doctor had made a mistake. Believe me, someone with memory problems doesn't do that." The judge nodded and took notes. The defendants, on the other hand, visibly tensed up. Evelyn rolled her eyes. Rachel pressed her lips together. "Did she ever complain of confusion?" the judge asked. "Not once. In fact, she often came in and said that her family wanted to rewrite everything again. But according to her, she wasn't going to change anything. She had already made up her mind." There was a pause in the courtroom. A heavy, silent pause. Martin looked at me. It was an important moment. The words of an ordinary man, a simple pharmacist, sounded louder than any piece of paper. The judge thanked Mr. Hendricks, and he left. Then a man in a gray suit, an unfamiliar face, stood up. Rachel introduced him. "This is Dr. Lawrence Wood. He is the second expert witness we would like to present to the court." Martin frowned but said nothing. Dr. Wood began to speak slowly, almost reading from a piece of paper. "I have studied Mrs. Hart's case based on records provided by her family. These records indicate that in the last months of her life, she showed signs of early dementia." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Did you personally meet with Mrs. Hart?" "No," he admitted. "I relied on the materials that were gathered." "And who provided those materials?" "Relatives." "So you're giving a medical opinion based on the accounts of interested parties," the judge clarified. He hesitated. "This is not uncommon." The judge closed the file. "That's not enough to cast doubt on the application that has already been filed. We'll take note of it, but not as expert testimony." Rachel lowered her eyes. "I felt the tightness in my chesties." 1-0. Not a final victory, but an important step. After the hearing, Martin and I went out into the hallway. He turned to me. "We need another name. Someone who knew her personally. Not a relative, but someone who was close to her." I thought about it. Then I remembered the librarian, Mrs. Ellis. "Her?" he asked, surprised. "Yes. My grandmother went there every week. They even spent evenings reading together. If anyone saw her in that state, it was her." He nodded. "Excellent. Let's invite her. In the meantime, get ready. Next week could be decisive." The next day, we went to see Mrs. Ellis. The library where she worked was still there, an old red brick building with quiet, creaky floors and the smell of dusty pages that reminded me of my childhood. She met us at the entrance, a short woman in her 70s with soft eyes and neatly pinned gray hair. "Lizzie," she said, recognizing me immediately. "You've grown up so much. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." We sat down in the reading room, where the round table my grandmother loved to sit at still stood. The books were still there, neatly stacked in a pile. "Your grandmother was a bright woman," said Mrs. Ellis. "Stubborn, yes, but always clear-headed. Right up to the end. Believe me, I've seen people start to lose their minds. Mary never did. We used to discuss novels, newspapers, even politics. She could remember in detail who said what last week. And she often talked about you." I wasn't expecting that and smiled involuntarily. "Did you know she had made a will?" Martin asked. Mrs. Ellis nodded. "Yes. She shared her thoughts with me. She was worried that after she died, someone would try to change everything. I told her, 'Mary, everything will be fair, it's family.' She just smiled, bitterly. She said, 'That's exactly why I've taken care of everything in advance.'" Pause. Martin nodded, taking notes. "Did you ever notice anyone putting pressure on her?" At this point, a slight chill appeared in Mrs. Ellis's voice. "A man came to see me once. He said he wanted to help Mary sort out her papers. He introduced himself as a family friend. He was too polite, too confident. I was suspicious. He asked if Mary had forgotten her books, if she had lost her keys. And then I found out it was Jason, your cousin. I felt the blood pounding in my temples." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I remember his face. He came more than once. And then Grandma started asking me to pass her books through the window so they don't bother her. That's what she said." We took her statement. And as we were leaving, Mrs. Ellis handed me a small notebook. She left it here when she didn't want anyone in the house to read her notes. "This is her handwriting. I think you should have it now." I took it in my hands and my heart sank. The pages were full of short notes, reflections, and even diary entries about her family. About me. About her fear that her voice would be silenced. One sentence was circled. "If you're reading this, it means they tried. Don't be silent." The notebook was like a direct line between me and my grandmother, almost a voice through time. I gave it to Martin the next day. He studied it for a long time, carefully, turning page after page. "These aren't just personal notes," he finally said. "They're evidence. There are dates, specific names, even a description of a meeting with a notary. She knew everything. And, apparently, she foresaw everything." I just nodded. I didn't have the strength to speak. "We'll present this to the court as direct written evidence. And, Lizzie," he looked at me, "this is no longer just about a will. It's a matter of dignity. And memory." That evening, I returned home with a heavy heart. I wasn't expecting a call, but it came. The number was unfamiliar, and at first I didn't want to answer. But curiosity got the better of me. "Lizzie," the voice said. "It's Jason." I didn't say anything. "Listen, I think we've gone too far. We need to talk. No courts, no press, no circus. Are you calling to apologize?" He was silent. "Not exactly. I'm offering a compromise. We'll divide the property between the three of us, you, me, and Rachel. Fair and square. Everyone's happy." I smiled. "What about Grandma? Will she be happy?" "Lizzie, it's just a piece of paper. Do you really want to drag this out for years? Spend thousands on lawyers?" "It's not just a piece of paper, Jason," I said quietly. "It's her voice. And I'm not going to betray her. Not for any percentage." He exhaled heavily. "Well, then you chose. Good luck." And he hung up. I sat there in silence. He didn't even try to say he was sorry. To him, it was a game. A deal. To me, it was family. That night, I took out my notebook and reread one passage. Don't let them make you feel guilty for being honest. I closed it, clenching it tightly in my palm. After Jason's call, everything seemed to shift. The phone started ringing off the hook. First, it was my aunt, Rachel's mother. Then my cousin, whom I hadn't heard from in years. They all called with the same tone. "Lizzie, what are you doing? We're family. You can't do this." It was as if they were repeating the same thing over and over again. Grandma was old. She didn't know what she was doing. You just didn't know what it was really like. Why stir things up? You can't change anything. At some point, I turned off my phone. That's when an email arrived. It was a very ordinary email from someone whose name I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Mary, the will." I was a witness. I opened the email with trembling fingers. "Hello. My name is George Haley. I live next door to your grandmother. I don't think you remember me. We saw each other when you were just a child. I want you to know that your grandmother did indeed make a will long before she became ill. And I was the one who signed it as a witness." My chest tightened. "I have a copy, unofficial, but genuine. She left it with me in case something went wrong. I didn't interfere all this time because I didn't know what was going on. But now I see that what she feared is happening. If you want to talk, here's my number. George." I read the letter twice. Then I called. He answered almost immediately. His voice was old but confident. "I'm glad you got back to me, Elizabeth. I'm sorry I still call you by your full name. Mary always said my Lizzie will be strong, even when no one understands her. Tell me, is that true?" I asked, almost in a whisper. "It's true. I was at her house when she signed the papers. Everything was still fine then." She was laughing, even joking. She said, "George, you may be grumpy, but I trust you more than my own family." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. "And you, do you have that copy?" "Yes. It's not certified, of course. But the handwriting is hers. And the date. And the contents. She left it all to you." He paused and added, "I can send it to your lawyer. Or I can come in person. Whatever you want." I clutched the phone. "Come. Please." George arrived 2 days later. He got out of an old silver pickup truck, tall, thin, with a straight posture and a serious expression. He was holding a neat folder tied with string. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "I haven't opened it since that day. Since Mary left, there was no need, but now it's important." Martin and I sat down at the table. I opened the folder. There, between two thick sheets of cardboard, lay a piece of paper. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable, with slightly elongated letters and capital letters. It was a will. It was written clearly, without any unnecessary phrases. "I, Mary Hart, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath all my property to my granddaughter, Elizabeth Harper, without division or restriction. She is my light, my pride, my last truth. And I do not want anyone else to decide for me who this belongs to." The date. The signature. And below, 2 witnesses. One of them was George Haley. Martin nodded silently. "This is not the official original, but together with the other evidence and the diary, it is powerful proof. Tomorrow we will give copies to the judge." I thanked George sincerely, my voice trembling. He just shrugged. "I didn't do anything special. I just kept my word. She knew she might not be heard. That's why she left a copy with me. The next day, everything changed. Martin took the papers to the court. Almost immediately, Rachel called me. Lizzie, her voice was no longer as haughty as before. We need to talk. Please. I agreed. We met at a cafe near the court. She arrived first and sat twisting a napkin in her hands. She looked confused, even a little tired. I didn't know Grandma could arrange everything like this, she began. I thought she was just tired. She wasn't thinking straight. We did everything for her own good. We thought. It was convenient for you, I interrupted. When someone is weak, it's easy to take advantage of them. And when they have a voice, you want to silence them. She lowered her eyes. You don't want to destroy the family, do you? I looked at her directly. I didn't destroy her. After meeting with Rachel, I felt a strange emptiness. There was no guilt or anger in her voice anymore, just exhaustion. She didn't try to justify herself. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just gave up. And for some reason, that hurt more than if she had screamed. The court began to consider the new evidence, George's testimony, a copy of the will, the diary. Martin walked confidently, almost predatorily. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a cold expression, listened attentively. For the first time, I felt that the truth wasn't just somewhere inside me, it was on paper. It couldn't be denied now. The next day, Rachel called again. She sounded uncertain, almost frightened. Lizzie, can we meet again? We met in the park. It was a cool morning with a light fog, as if everything around us had frozen, waiting for something important. You want to know how it all happened, don't you? She asked, not looking at me. I'll tell you. I nodded silently. It wasn't me who started it, she whispered. It was Aunt Sandra. She found a folder with some papers in Grandma's room when she was in the hospital. There was a will. She was scared, she said. You can't leave this behind. She said you were young, you had your whole life ahead of you, and they're getting old, and they won't have anything left. I didn't say anything. Sandra, her mother, the same woman who called me with accusations. We went to Jason. He knows a lot about documents. He sorted everything out. He said that if the notarized copy goes missing, no one will believe the original exists. And if my grandmother is a little out of it, we can do everything again, differently. I clenched my hands. And you? I asked quietly. Why did you go with them? Rachel looked at me, and there was shame in her eyes. I was afraid. All my childhood, I listened to my mother. She made me believe that you always had it better, that you were her favorite, that Grandma gave you her heart and forgot about us. And I believed her. I was a fool. She exhaled and added, but when I saw your eyes in court, I realized you weren't fighting for money. You were fighting for the truth. And we betrayed her. I didn't know what to say. Not because I didn't want to, but because words lost their meaning in the face of what had already been done. A couple of days after meeting Rachel, when everything seemed to have calmed down a bit, Martin called me at dawn. Lizzie, I have news. Very good news. I barely managed to squeeze out, what? Remember we wrote to the Notary Association asking who had drawn up your grandmother's will? Yes, but you said they didn't find anything. They didn't find it in the main system. But one of the senior notaries, Mr. Caldwell, worked with your grandmother personally. He's retired now, but he kept copies of all his important files in his paper archive. And he found Mary Hart's file, with a draft and a note. Original will handed to client in person. No copy required, at client's request. So, I was afraid to believe it. That means we have official confirmation that the will did indeed exist, was drawn up, and was handed over to your grandmother. We don't know where the original is. It may have disappeared with her belongings, but the fact that it was drawn up has now been confirmed by a notary. And Mr. Caldwell is willing to give written testimony and, if necessary, come in person. I couldn't speak. I just held the phone and let the tears flow down my cheeks. They weren't tears of joy, no. It was a release. A long, hard, and much-needed release. Lizzie, Martin said softly, we're almost there. 2 days later, we were sitting in his office. He read the letter from the notary aloud. I hereby confirm that Ms. Mary Hart personally approached me with a request to draw up a will in which she bequeathed all her property to her granddaughter, Elizabeth Harper. The document was signed in my presence, certified, and handed over to the client. This was her firm expression of will, made without any pressure from third parties. Those words were like a hammer blow to the lie, like light in a dark house. That evening, Rachel sent a message. I told my mom everything. And Jason. They're panicking. But it doesn't matter anymore. I'll testify if I have to. I want the truth to finally come out. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote a short reply, thank you. It's important. The courtroom was spacious, but it felt cramped with tension. I sat next to Martin, trying not to look across the room at the people who had known me since childhood and who had betrayed me as an adult. Aunt Sandra, Jason, my cousins, even one of my grandmother's friends, the one who had turned away from me at the funeral. The judge entered silently, his expression betraying neither sympathy nor irritation, only severity and attention. Today, we are considering the application of Elizabeth Harper to establish the authenticity of the will of Mary Hart. I call on the plaintiff's counsel to present his case. Martin stood up. His speech was calm and clear. He read aloud in turn, a copy of the will, a letter from the notary Caldwell, an extract from the archives, entries from his grandmother's diary, and scans of her handwriting. And finally, the statement of the witness, George Haley. I request that the witness be called to the courtroom, he said. The judge nodded. George entered the courtroom slowly but confidently. He was wearing a dark jacket and holding a neatly wrapped folder in his hands. I'm not a lawyer, he said with a smile, but I have a good memory. Mary was a strong woman. She knew what she was doing. She said my Lizzie deserved it. Not for what she did, but for always being there, even when everyone else was busy with their own lives. He handed the judge the folder. These are copies of pages from her personal notebook. She asked me to keep them. She said if anyone denied it, to give them to the person who would fight for her. The judge took the documents. She looked through them silently. Then she put them aside. Thank you, Mr. Haley. Jason's lawyer tried to object, talking about unofficial nature and emotional involvement. But the judge interrupted him. We are not considering technical inaccuracies, but a chain of events confirmed by several independent sources. I accept this as part of the case. Something appeared on Sandra and Jason's faces that I had never seen before in all this time. Not resentment, not contempt, fear. After the trial, everything happened quickly. Martin filed a motion for a financial examination. The court approved it, and soon documents began to arrive, statements from the grandmother's accounts, transaction records, printouts of phone calls, and visits to notary services. We sat in his office and looked at the list, unauthorized access to Mary's bank account 2 days before her death. Attempt to change the beneficiary on the insurance policy. A large sum transferred to an account linked to Jason. A request to a notary public for the loss of a will made by Sandra on the same day my grandmother was in intensive care. This was no longer just a moral betrayal. It was the deliberate and legally documented destruction of a person's last will and testament. At the next hearing, the judge asked, Ms. Harper, do you have anything to add? I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I did not come to this court for revenge, nor did I come for property. I came here to restore what was destroyed by lies, memory. My grandmother is gone, but she had a right, her last right, to dispose of her life as she saw fit. I looked at Sandra, Jason, and the others. And I added, you didn't just steal some papers. You tried to erase a person. But she had a voice, and it speaks through us, through those who do not remain silent. The judge put down her glasses. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the stenographer's cameras clicking. After the hearing, Rachel came up to me. She was silent for a second, then said, "You're stronger than I thought." It wasn't that kind of strength I feared as a child when my mother told me you were her favorite. She wasn't afraid of my grandmother's love. She was afraid that one day you would tell the truth. I nodded. And now you've heard it. The court's decision was read calmly, clearly, almost matter-of-factly. The court recognized my grandmother's will as legal and made in her right mind. All attempts by relatives to annul it were recognized as fraudulent actions, which did not result in criminal liability only because of the absence of direct financial damage and on the initiative of the plaintiff, me. Everything was returned to me: my grandmother's house, her accounts, her old papers, her jewelry, even the armchair with the knitted blanket, which they had already taken to their home. Now it was all in my name again. But most of all, I felt that she had returned. Not physically, but through the truth that I had managed to restore. In the evening, after the trial, I went to my grandmother's house. It stood quiet with the shutters closed. Inside, everything was almost untouched. Those who had tried to take it had not had time to remodel it for themselves. It was waiting for me. I put the kettle on. I sat down in the kitchen, and I looked out the window to where my grandmother always planted her daisies. Someone knocked on the door. It was Aunt Sandra, tired, looking 10 years older in a couple of weeks. No bright makeup, no jewelry, just a plain gray jacket. "I'm not going to make excuses," she said, "but I want to say one thing." I nodded. "I knew you would find out. I knew it from the beginning. And yet I tried to erase you. Because I was jealous. All my life. Because you were there for her when I wasn't. And not because I couldn't be, but because I didn't want to." She lowered her gaze. "I don't need your forgiveness. But if you ever look back, remember that you're still human, even when we weren't." I didn't answer. She left, and I sat there in silence for a long time. Sometimes revenge isn't an action. It's simply refusing to lie, and a life with no debts left. Several days passed. The trial was over, the lawyers had left, and the house was quiet again. I tidied up, slowly and thoughtfully, as if I were restoring the soul of the house. I sorted through the shelves, washed the tablecloths, and sorted through my grandmother's old books, the ones she used to read in the evenings. And suddenly, between the pages of a worn volume of Jane Austen that she always kept on her bedside table, I found a thin, neatly folded sheet of paper. A note. Her handwriting. Recognizable. Slightly uneven, but determined. I unfolded it and read, "My dear Lizzie, if you are reading this, something has gone wrong. I don't know if you will find my will. But know this. I did not write it for money. I wrote it to leave you what you truly deserve: gratitude. For the years, for the care, for always being there. There are many words in this family, but little silence. And you always knew how to listen, even when it hurt, even when I was silent. I'm sorry if I didn't do everything right. I'm sorry I didn't say it out loud. But know this, I always believed that the truth would come out one day. With love, your grandmother Mary, asterisk, I put the letter back in the book. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because it was already inside me. Life didn't change magically. Relatives drifted apart. Some moved away. Some, like Rachel, wrote occasional short, awkward letters. I replied without resentment, but without the former closeness. I didn't spend the money. I invested it in the library my grandmother had dreamed of opening at the church. I named it after her. And every time someone takes a book from that very shelf, I think, sometimes the last word is simply the truth, spoken with love.